Hi, ladies. So let's get into this Danae Jackson interview. When I sent the poll out I sent an email out asking what y'all want to talk about. And I got Queen Charlotte and I got Danae Jackson. And as a bonus, I'm going to also add Run the World because I know we're all watching it. So this is going to be the video on Danae Jackson. We also have our live stream on June 29th. Now listen, this live stream is gonna work in a twofold way. I'm happy to show up to the space to help you, but you have to let me know what you want to talk about. And you have to give me questions, give me content, things that you want me to discuss. I'm not going to curate too many topics when it comes to the live stream on my own, though I probably will from time to time. So I assume y'all want to talk about this Danae Jackson interview. So here is our pop viral cultural clip on it, and then we can extend the conversation in the live stream. If that's what you would like to do, please comment and tell me based on what I shared today. So I just want to give a disclaimer and say it is my coaching nature that when pop and viral culture clips come known to us, for me to use them as teaching tools. I want to use them as teaching tools to prepare you, to empower you, to reposition you as a Black woman in your dating practices or in your relationship. I know I have a couple of wives here too, so even in your marriages. Now, this particular video can hit all three, right? It can hit daters, it can hit persons in relationships, and it can also hit wives because Danae tells a over decade long story as she was literally just meeting someone. So it was kind of like a talking dating situation in a relationship and then also into marriage. So that's how I want to use this. I do not want to, in the name of sisterhood, I'm not using this space to judge her, to speak against her, to badmouth her, to dog her out in any way. That's not what we do here. However, when people share their stories publicly, we can use the content in that story to figure out, Lord, how are we going to be? How do we want to define things? How do we want to highlight issues? How do we look at this story and reflect back on self? And what do we have or don't have? How can we evolve? All the questions, right? So I just want to make sure we stay in that energy. I'm going to start with saying, I think she spoke too soon. I think she is speaking too soon. I think that psychologically and healing in that category, and I also think it legally as it relates to what it means to be a legal parent, to have a legal divorce, and to divide assets when it comes to dissolving a marriage. I'm actually surprised that her legal counsel did not advise her to just hush until divorce proceedings were complete. In all of my experience, when I have spoken to wives who were at the point of dissolving a marriage, including myself, the legal counsel was to hush. Hush until everything has been divided, it is done, you have a legal divorce decree in hand, because opposing counsel and opposing party can use any information that you share, especially if you share it publicly, against you, or they can at least bring things to the legal proceedings and before the judge to ask questions. And I don't know why she's speaking this soon. She even confessed it in the interview. When it comes to the psychological and healing, in 6 months, can you have restored yourself to a great degree? Yes, I know I did. 6 months later, I actually took 6 months to let me get myself together. And by the time I got to the end of that 6 months, I was in a space where I was ready to socialize with other men, where I could go out and be like, hey, if a guy said something to me, I might be able to fancy it. So I believe that 6 months can be enough time to kind of have yourself recalibrated, but I don't know that 6 months is enough time for you to start sharing the story, particularly publicly. I would not have done that 6 months after my separation, divorce, what have you. And especially when I have minor children to consider, I'm like, how do I want my children to hear this? I don't know. I think that's all a case of too soon. Anywho, second thing is, I don't think that a single man should have interviewed her alone. His heart was certainly in the right place, but he steadily asked the wrong questions. He displayed insensitivities, way too much for me. Up until, I think the thing that really got me was the inappropriate laughing. And then he missed real opportunities to explore real issues that women would have cared about. As she's saying stuff, I'm like, I would have asked this question, say this, say that. And I just knew he was, and he wouldn't. I knew that it would be churchy. I understand the platform that I was watching the interview on, but it went church south for me, particularly towards the end of part one, and then again about the mid to end point of part two. But you know, this is a Christian platform. This is a Christian interviewer, a Christian guest. So I guess to be expected. I also think that she seems to be at peace in her life. It seems that the trajectory that it assumes in the aftermath of recovering from her abuse and oppression, it seems that that's there. I'm gonna, let her have that. I'm also gonna trust her timing. This is your life, girl. So if you think you should speak out on this in the middle of divorce proceedings and 6 months after the beginning of your recovery, I'm gonna have to leave that to you. At 33, her magic year, her Jesus year, I anticipate nothing but good things. But I will say I need her to legally dissolve her divorce and see what that looks like before I can say that the upswing is in the clear for me. That's that. Okay, so we're gonna use this video or this interview again as teachable moments. So I listed out some questions. I'm gonna pose them inside of the chat as well, or inside of the thread as well, for you to just chew on yourself, because again, we're not gonna use this story to beat up on this woman or to judge her or anything like that. We're gonna use it and go, ooh, let's make sure our house is in order. Let's make sure we're clear about this thing. Let's make sure all of those things. So to do that, I like to pose questions as teachable moments. And if the question applies, pursue it. If it doesn't, toss it. I realize, because I have women who are dating, women who are in relationships, women who are marriages, and even within that, there's different levels. I know not every single question will apply, but let's get into it. First question, what is the relationship quality like between you and your father? Have you addressed anything that has been left unchecked, undone, unsaid, unprocessed? All those things. We know that the persons who parented you, usually bio parents, but not always, they set the foundation for your own sense of self, how you view yourself, and how you relate to others. And as a woman, or as a women, we are particularly focused on that father because he is setting the blueprint for how you will view yourself when it comes to men and how you will relate to them as well. So if you're listening to the Match Made Made podcast, episode 4, I Am Valued, has a lot of meat for you to chew on when it comes to that father-daughter dynamic, if that is you. Question number 2, are you holding feelings of rejection and or abandonment with anyone, but especially a parent? How are you processing and healing? Very, very important, because she just didn't. Her father was not reliable. Her father was not present. And then he ended up passing when she was 12, and she never dealt with it. She carried it with her throughout childhood. She took it with her in her transition to adulthood. And she had not even fully become a woman by the time she meets her abuser, Lord, and then also the man who would become her husband. All right, number 3, are there any troublesome or traumatic events in your life that you're suppressing? It is one thing to say, hey, I went through this and it was tough, it was hard, it was troublesome, or it was traumatic, life-changing, soul-shaking. She said soul-crushing. It is one thing to have that event and that experience in your life. It is another for you to act like you didn't, or don't own it, don't seek to get help, don't talk it out with someone. All the things. So is that you? Are you suppressing? What issues are those? Who can help you bring them to the light of day? Therapy? A parent? A sibling? A trusted friend? Question number 4, there's a difference between being in a relationship and being in a committed relationship. I say this to my clients so many times, and now my mentees so many times. And that is, y'all, we have to have conversations. We have to have definitions, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. But committed relationship. People are in relationships without commitment. And Danae was. She had this relationship. It was intact. People knew they were together. They knew that they were an item, but there was no commitment. She could not trust his word. She could not trust his actions. She could not trust him to protect or defend her or the nature of the relationship. In certain ways, she didn't unpack it fully, but in certain ways, she made it seem like she couldn't even trust him fully as the father of her children. There's no commitment here. No commitment. And I love that she said, look, let's define commitment. Exactly. So on her way out, or in hindsight, she's seeing where she needed to have clarity, where she needed definition, where she needed coverage. She needed so many things. And I'm so happy she's able to identify and pinpoint those things now, because she just didn't have the mind to do so young. Which brings me to this. I like to say that the partner you choose, and I'll raise my hand here, I like to say that the partner you choose should bear at least 2 things. Be representative of what you've been told and taught, and I mean by trusted persons. So if that trusted person in your life is your mom, your best friend, your godmama, your nana, your pastor, what have you. Because why do people in your life why don't they bear witness of what's already in you, of what you've been taught and told that you trust, right? That you trust. And then the second thing that the person should bear, it should be evident. And it shouldn't be just evident to you, though obviously it should probably start there, is that this person, how can I put it? I'm going to still use representative. That this person is representative of who you are as an evolved woman. And that means you would have to transition into full womanhood before that could even be obvious to you, let alone apparent in the relationship. And so getting into relationships too young, a puppy love situation, maybe not so much, but getting into relationships too young, it dwarfs that, it stifles that. So I'll use me as an example. I got married young, and at the time, I had not fully developed into my womanhood. I couldn't have been. I was 21, right? Developmentally, you're not even grown until 25, and some people do not sprout into the fullness of their womanhood or manhood until a little bit later. For me, it started to happen around 27, 28, which is typical, but 25 is like adulthood, and then it takes a few years to this person is a whole grown woman. This person is a whole grown man. And yes, adulthood and womanhood are different. Adulthood and manhood are different. Obviously, there's a relationship, but we can't exactly say they are the same thing at the same time. And so for what I knew, I did my part, right? At the time, the person I was married to was representative of what I had been taught and told by the trusted people in my life. Still consider them the trusted people in my life. But there is no way that I could have accounted for and made the decision, an informed decision, knowing that this person can rock with me in the fullness of my womanhood, because it had not even happened yet. I didn't know what it was. I didn't relate to it. It was premature. And so I love to see her now in this fully evolved state, which for her came around 29, 30. She was starting to, and even still, it was just coming to the light of day. It wasn't firmed or fixed yet. And I would say it's definitely more there now than it seemed it to be when she was storytelling in previous years. But I can still see some areas where it's all right, it's not full grown woman yet, but she's getting there. And so we gotta we got to make sure we're not getting into things too young where we're doing ourselves a disservice for who we will become in a way that will pretty much always be. I mean, you can always reinvent yourself. There's so much life, and as long as you have that life and time and years, you can do things with it. But who you are as this grown woman, you might take different expressions and channels of that throughout your life as you want to, or as life kind of calls you to. But it's pretty set in terms of like, nah, this is who I am. This is the standard. This is the boundary. This is what I'm not going to do. I done that before. I know what that looks like. I know better. This isn't me. This is definitely me. This is my style. This is all of that stuff. So I just wanted to drop that in there. But the question for you is, what's the difference between being in a relationship, and being in a committed relationship? What's the difference? Is there? And what is it for you? What's acceptable? And while we're at it, how do you define commitment? All things that we can bring ourselves to think about and kind of identify for ourselves as we take in her story. Next is courage. Courage. If you've ever heard one of my webinars, if you've ever heard me on Clubhouse, this is a huge deal. They seem to be fearful, timid, hesitant to state their own standards, boundaries, their own lines in the sand with men. And sometimes they're hesitant to just vocalize their thoughts and their feelings with men. And that lack of courage will cost you every single time. So my question to you is, how would you rate your courage level with men? Why do you speak up? Or why don't you speak up or speak out for yourself or about your feelings? Or if you do, kudos to you, but let's just do a courage check-in and see where we are. And I know it's tough, but you must know this is where I'm willing to do things with men, and this is where I call it. This is where I say things. This is where I require things, or even demand, depending on what's going on. And she said something like that in the video. She said, well, once I started to demand it, I was like, oh, Lord, things can get interesting, right? Because how you build a house is how it stands. She walked into that marriage with all of these issues being the issues, with her, being timid, being shy, not being vocal, and she went into marriage like that. And so that is the beat. That is the beat to that marital drum. And unless you tear that house down and start all over, you're not going to get anything different. And I think she didn't have the fullness of that understanding, but I believe she kind of like baby consciously knew that, because on her list of, I think it was 13 things she says, I wanted to renew our vows, right? And I think the interviewer asked, why did you want to renew your vows? And she was like, because that was how we entered. That was a hot mess. We needed to renew this. Interestingly enough, that was the one thing on the list they never did. It is so important. I say this all the time. How you build a house is how it stands. If you go into something, if you consent, if you invite, if you give your yes, you agree to things, and you don't like it like that, you don't want it to be like that. First of all, why would you, right? But I get it. Sometimes you're young, you don't know any better. She had a lot of issues going on as to how that could be the case. But when you give your yes, when you give your consent, when you give your invitation, all of those things, the way that it is, that is how it is going to be. And it will take a new act to get it to be differently. And if it's a relationship, both parties need to consent to the new act. And he did not. He was like, yeah, no, we're not doing all of that. Seemed like he would at certain times, as she tells it, but it never actually manifested. And so while this is not permission for him to mistreat her, dog her, and do her like he did, he has been the consistent party. He has functioned in the marriage the way he's always functioned. And he got married functioning like that. So, I mean, dare I say, a person isn't wrong, and I'm using that loosely, to expect that a marriage would run the exact way it's always ran when you haven't required or asked or laid it out that it needs to be a certain way. even when it came to the premarital counseling, which we're going to get on in a second, but he just quit. That should have been a sign, but again, sometimes we miss things. We're young, we're naive, we're depressed, we're suppressing all the things. Okay, so for me, next, there are times in the interview when both of them state humility for me in a misguided and incorrect way. I would actually call a lot of what they call humility manipulation. I did not spot one act of humility on Derek's part at all. So my questions for you are, how do you respond to him calling her mother for her hand in marriage, especially when they weren't even in a relationship? I can't believe they called that humility. I was like, this is textbook manipulation. How do you respond? Next question. How do you respond to him flying to Denver to meet her, and she was already taking a cross-country drive to be away from him? That is not humility. And how do you respond to his insertion that the condo was for business? I'll hear your thoughts. You can put them in the comments. You can say, ooh, this is what I want to talk about on the live stream. Just as I give this video, pick apart what you know you want to talk about in the live stream, if anything at all, and I will make it happen. All right. Next is Danae mentions that in their relationship reunion, she talked about they're leaving Raleigh, North Carolina, and they're going to Atlanta, Georgia, that they never had a conversation about getting back together. This just hurts my heart. This whole story hurts my heart. It took me a little while to get through, but she never had a conversation. They never had any conversation or any agreement who they were to each other or not, and what she could expect from him. And so, y'all, please do not engage with men and you don't know what it is to expect out of them. Like, you should know. You should be like, yep, I know he will do this, he won't do this. He said he would do this, he said he would do that, and make sure it's not just he said. Make sure you've let enough time passage go by where that can be verified through observation or experience with your own eyes. But all she was left with was a whole heap of unclarity and guesswork. That's it. She even said it was implied, never a conversation. So I always encourage women to have conversation and make sure you have those conversations with definitions and questions. Ask questions. And if anything, Danae was definitely giving us that message, right? Ask questions. I had so many questions, but she had them after the fact. And she needed so many definitions after the fact. So let that be a cautionary tale for us right now. And even if you are in a relationship or married, I mean, I still practice this. It is a practice of mine, which is another element of evolving into, oh, I am a grown woman. And that is understanding how you practice when it comes to different things, but particularly things that you know are going to always come up in your life, or they just be a part of your life in general. I know that. So I set the bar when it came to my husband. It's like, oh, what that mean? When I have conversations, I need definitions and I need space to ask my questions and for them to be answered back to me. And so we created a kind of flow, a workflow, if you will, that works best for us, for him to provide those things for me and for me to feel like I got those things, you know, out of him. And every couple has to figure out where their sweet spot is with these things. But definitions and questions, please. Do not be agreeing to things with men and they are not defined, either because you have defined, this is what this means to me and this is what I'm talking about. Y'all co-define, because sometimes that's necessary depending on what's happening, or you're just asking him, no, what does that mean for you? I want to know what I can hold you to as you understand it. Okay, so my question is, how do you enter into romantic relationships with men? Next is, this is that premarital counseling. There's no other way to just say, please allow the fact that refusing premarital counseling in a season of engagement, please allow that to be the reason that all wedding plans halt, even if it's just for the moment. All of this comes to a halt if we're not finishing our counseling. And I know people are faith-based, some people aren't, but whatever, whether you have decided to just do the workshop with the pastor or with the church, whether you decided to do therapy as well as something with your church or your pastor, whether you just are doing therapy, whether you're doing a retreat or whatever it is that y'all decide, do something that is going to help you anticipate and prepare for this thing called marriage while you are in your season of engagement. So my question for you is, what are your views on premarital or pre-wedding counseling? Do you want it? Do you require it? Do you value it? Why do you or why don't you? I would advise that you're doing something to help prepare you for marriage. Because everything else, if you don't intentionally go, hey, we're going to do some counseling to prep us for marriage, everything else is about the wedding. And the wedding is beautiful and it's an awesome day and I want you to have that. But it's quite literally just one day. And I know it's your day, but it's just one day. Somebody's got to be preparing you for this thing called marriage, for this institution of marriage, as they say. This is also a cautionary tale in being, it could be a lot of things, being too desperate, being too thirsty, or just wanting a man more than you want yourself. And sometimes you are caught up in the status and the title of being wife, but not anything else. And that usually happens to women whose either their self-value, their self-worth is low, or they've been groomed or taught, oh, you want to be married, you want to be married. Like, who are you if you're not somebody's wife? Or they come from church where it's completely, you got to get married, you got to get married, you got to get married, you got to get married. When either of those are your normal, when they are your reality, it kind of blinds you to the preparation of yourself as a woman anticipating marriage, but it also blinds you to the process that you put a man through to show himself worthy of having you. That's what it does. And so you get so caught up in being his wife that you don't take the time to make sure he can be your husband, or even better, be your partner, or be your co-parent. There's so many, be your business partner, be your teammate. There's so many things that come with being married that if you have not made sure the person can be all of those things, you just have a legal husband, right? You don't quite literally have a marriage, because all of those other things are dwarfed or stunted or even non-existent. And so she allowed that to happen because, I just want to say I'm Mrs. Jackson. I just want to say I'm somebody's wife. That was part of it. Okay, that was part of it. And that is not seeing yourself worthy enough for any of those reasons that I just mentioned. The other part of it was he put her in a position where she had to compete for his attention, compete for his love, compete for his affection, compete for his loyalty. And you should not ever have to do that as a woman. But because she had been conditioned for this competition of him, it now made it be in her mind that being his wife, being married to him, was some award that she had won, and she confessed to that. And I know if we come from church circles, and sometimes not even, because this is starting to veer over into pop culture, and that is this idea that I'm the prize. Sometimes men say it, sometimes women say it, sometimes both. I just absolutely disdain that ideology, because people aren't tokens to be won. And women aren't tokens to be won. I really don't like that. But that was her conditioning. So between her valuing marriage as a Christian woman, and you should value marriage as a Christian woman, rightfully so, but the way she was taking it in, and she admits she was a baby into Christian faith and all of that, I get it. And the way she devalued herself, her self-esteem was low, her self-worth was low. And the way she had kind of prized in her mind the status of being wife, working with the competition that he bred in her by way of him never really fleeing all others, never really ceasing all others, particularly women, right? she was like, oh, I'm about to show these chicks I won. I'm his wife. I'm this, I'm that. Not realizing, girl, that's not the flex that you think it is. Because I'm pretty sure the majority of those women, I know I was I was watching thinking this. I can only imagine some of the women he was in relationships with or simply just sleeping with while he was with her, and that was a known fact. And while they were married, it's like, oh, I wouldn't want to be his wife. Because if that's how I don't want to be his wife. So you actually look silly. And I think that's one of the dangers of propping up marriage alone without adding in the responsibility. I mean, the reward too, but without adding in the responsibility that it comes with, and adding how the character of a man and woman, how that needs to shift when you elevate to husband and wife. Because otherwise, girl, you just got, I mean, legally you got his last name, and you know, you have some status, but it's not the flex you think it is when you don't have full status, because you occupy a position that you are dwarfed in. It would be better to just not have the position if you can't walk into it in the fullness thereof. And you know, she was starting to feel the gap and the distance there. All right, next question. By the time they reached that point of her having this Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule with her man in a rotation of a host of other women Derek was sleeping with, her self-worth was long gone. Now, not that it was much when she met him, but at this point it is below zero. And you just have to be careful to not want a man more than you want yourself. I don't know how many times I can scream that. So the question is, in what ways do you honor yourself as you relate to men? Check in with yourself and assess where your self-worth barometer is. Are you good? Do you have any work to do? Let's just check in. Next question. I'm setting up the scenarios as I ask these questions. But next, while I'm all for a mother protecting her son, I am a mother. I have 2 sons. I can definitely be mama bear when it comes to them. But there has to also be a posture for and the protection of the sisterhood, particularly when you know your son is foul. Even if he's not foul, like in general, and he's just doing it with the woman in question. When you know he's foul, you know he's foul. And so why would you position yourself as a woman, albeit a mom, but as a woman, where you know that a man is dangerous or violent in some way, which he very much was, and his mother knew it? Why would you position a woman to be in the line of fire for that damage and violence? That blows my mind as a woman. That blows my mind. If you all saw my Tina Turner tribute video, one of the things that I praised her for, I think it was my second, I gave a top 3, it was my second, was her story teaching me the value of sisterhood, or her story being a vehicle by which my mother used to teach me the value of sisterhood. And my mom was very clear about violations, how women violate each other, and it really shreds the sisterhood apart. And so for Tina, you know, her mama was telling her, take them punches, you okay? And then telling Ike, you can beat on her long as you want to, long as you keep these checks rolling to me. Violation. And I can't for the life of me think why you would put a fellow woman in the line of fire to or in like a man's violence or damage. And sometimes even their ignorance. Not all the time, but sometimes even there, because sometimes you just got to be ignorant. You got to do something to know something. But sometimes even they're ignorant. So again, I was telling myself, I have a son, he's 14. He's sweet on this little girl. I don't allow girlfriends at this age. I don't allow him to use that language. You know, he's attempted. And I'm like, you don't have a girlfriend because you don't know how to be a boyfriend. You're not a boyfriend, because boyfriends do A, B, C, and D. Boyfriends know how to do A, B, C, and D. You don't even know what that means, let alone have the capacity to be able to deliver that. So, you know, you got a little friend you sweet on, and that's cute. I'll let that be, but let's be clear. So he wants to take this girl to a dance. He has his 8th grade dances coming up. And I sat him down and I was like, listen, there's a reason you have 2 parents. Mommy is going to teach you how a girl wants to experience an event. In this case, the 8th grade dance. Because I have credibility when it comes to that, because I am a woman. I used to be a girl. I know how, as in the position of being a woman, in the state of being a woman, I know how, generally speaking, women want to experience men, or girls want to experience boys. So I'm going to tell you what you need to do as a boy who wants to escort this girl to the dance, what you need to do to give her the experience that she wants. My husband is going to teach you, as a boy becoming a man. We call them man children. So as a man child, my husband is going to teach you what you need to know and understand about what it means to have this responsibility and how you show up for her, but also the protections, how you need to read how women move and do things as a man. And then together you'll be accounted for. And I said to him, at first he was like, Mommy, it's not that big of a deal. We don't have to do all of that. No, it is a big deal. And I'm going to tell you why it's a big deal. It's a big deal because you are asking to take someone's daughter out of their house to spend an evening with you. She didn't ask you to go to the dance. You asked her to go to the dance. And there's a way that you need to prepare and set up things for her so that she can make the transference from being in her house to being in your care and custody and still be fine. And I would never, if I knew that he was going to mistreat her, if I knew that he was not going to do right, if I knew it wasn't in his heart to do whatever, I would just be like, oh, you ain't about to take her. I'll call her and tell her to pass. Now, if she does it anyway, I have to let that be. But it'll be off of my hands by me saying, girl, he not ready, or you don't need to do this. So as I started to explain it to him, he saw the big deal that he was, and then he got in line. Right? Then he made it be a big thing. Because at first he was like, even something down to apparel, he was like, I'm just going to wear these jeans and this top. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's a sneaker ball. And I'm like, but it is a big deal. She don't want to see you in jeans. She don't want to be picked up and wearing what you would wear to school. That's not special. That's not a dance. You look like she could have seen this to look at school. And when he started to realize that, he was like, oh, Mommy, I need a suit and tie. I need this. I need that. And I told him about the corsage, like how you pick her up, just the experience, right? So here we have Danae confiding in Derek's mom. I mean, as she should have, for how she knew him and for what was going on. And she uses the details in that conversation and reports it back to Derek. It would have been fine for his mom to say, hey, I spoke to Danae, like, cool. Or maybe even use what she knew in the conversation to help, teach him, to help mold him, shape him, or even to warn him accordingly in the ways that mommies do without revealing the hand somewhere else. Cool. But to give him details that he could use against her, and he did, that's just wrong. The question for you is, how do you define sisterhood? And what issues do you regard as worthy efforts to protect it, and for whom? Do you think that Derek's mother was wrong to divulge Danae's details to her son? And then we're going to end with these two together. I heard lots of representations of the Word of God and other Christian principles / dogma that came up for me. So I want to know what came up for you, if anything. I know some people will listen to that and agree with everything, at least from a religious or a Christian perspective, and I get that. And then finally, do you think she's healed? And are there any similarities between you and Danae? If so, what are they? All right, I look forward to hearing your feedback in the comments, and I look forward to figuring out which of these topics do you want to speak about in our live stream. Again, it is Thursday, June 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Cheers!